All right, well, we're here this morning with Casey Ladelle.
That's me.
Yeah, excited to have him here. We're going to go through a couple of do's and don'ts, mostly don'ts,
Lots of don'ts. I'm really good at the don'ts.
on how to use kinetic recovery ropes and the best way to do it. So we'll touch on a couple of things as we go through this. Hopefully we can answer a lot of different questions that we keep getting. We took kind of some of the main questions that keep flooding in on, well, what if I do this? What if I don't do that kind of thing. And hopefully we get some questions answered as we go through this with the help from an expert.
Oh, easy with your fancy words there.
All right, Casey. So a question we get a lot is hard shackles versus soft shackles. When to use them, when to not use them.
So hard shackles, very durable over pretty much anything. But you have a big, heavy chunk of metal in your system now. Soft shackles.
Why is that an issue?
If there's a failure in anything, especially on the vehicle side or something like that, you now have this flying through the air, which is very dangerous. If this flies through the air, it doesn't hurt. Okay, next. So these are fast, safe, light, easy to carry, but a sharp edge, like if I were, say, using an axle strap that has this sharp edge here, I would not want a soft shackle pulling on that sharp edge. It would probably hold up, but you're also likely to damage it. Because a rope should never bend more or less than the diameter of the rope itself. So this is 3/8, 7/16, 7/16. So the radius this bends around should not be smaller than 7/16. If it's 7/16 radius, you've got your full rating. Any less than that, like this, and you are drastically reducing your rating.
Which damages the rope.
Yes.
Yep.
In that case, if I had to use this, I would use a hard shackle to connect it. And I would either connect this straight to the winch line, or if needed, then your soft shackle can go through there to connect whatever. And you now have a smooth radius that's not going to hurt the shackle. Granted, if you're using this, you probably don't need to use this too, but that's an option. Here's another very handy thing about a soft shackle over a hard shackle is you're never going to drop the pin of this in the snow and not be able to find it and be left with just this that does you no good.
Right. Yeah.
I know this from experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the other issue with a hard shackle, that is as big as the opening is. If you're trying to hook directly to the vehicle, you're very limited on what this would be able to hook to. Whereas with this, anything you can fit that around. This, you can open it as wide as you need, you can hook to. There's not a limit on size of what, well, there is a limit, but not nearly as limiting as that. That actually comes into play on the Hitch receiver if you can't use a tow point in the receiver. This I cannot fit around the tube of the receiver itself. This I can. Yeah.
So another question we get often is what's the safest way to hook to a vehicle? And typically we do that through a bridle. So what is a bridle? How do you use it? And what are the benefits of a bridle?
So a bridle is using, in this case, a kinetic rope or the tree saver strap, something like that, to go from one point to your pull point back to a second point on the vehicle, spreading the load and making it equal to both sides of the vehicle. So when you're pulling on it, you're pulling on both sides equally. Now there's two types of bridles more in the towing world. There's single or double leg bridles where this is a fixed point. Each one of these is solid. What's the problem with those is if you pull to the side, one goes slack and you're only pulling on one. They're only pulling even when you're pulling in a straight line. By doing it like this, where you don't even need a third shackle, by looping the end of either your tree saver strap or another rope through the end, now this is a floating bridle where this can move, and when you're pulling to the side, it's going to even out and always put the same load on both sides. You're just spreading the load out between the vehicle and making it far less likely to overload a single attachment point.
Awesome. So if you are connecting to a single point on a vehicle and you're towing, what tends to happen to the vehicle while it's being towed?
So if I'm pulling on only this side of the truck, which in some vehicles, that's your only option, it's going to pull that truck that direction because this rope is going over towards the center of the back of the vehicle pulling it. And it's going to pull it, try to pull it in line. It's going to try to put that tire in line with the center of the vehicle pulling it. So sometimes you don't have that option where you have to only hook to one. You got to be really cognizant of what it's going to do to the vehicle you're pulling.
Yep. So the driver's not fighting the whole time trying to keep the vehicle straight.
Correct.
Right? So what are the benefits of spreading the load?
Well, say this point right here is rated to 5,000 pounds. Well, if we're hooking to both, we now have 10,000 pounds of rated toe points to hook to instead of a single one. Also, it puts the load into both rails of the chassis or both sides of the unibody. It's not trying to torque on the vehicle.
By far, one of the most frequent questions we get is, where do I connect on a car?
So the answer to that is, we got no idea. Because it all depends on the car you're pulling out. And of course, for liability reasons, all I or Yankum will tell you is manufacturer's approved recovery points.
Okay, what about a screw-in tow hook?
So the screw-in tow hooks that screw in, the bumper cover pulls out, and you screw in the tow hook that you find in the trunk or by the spare tire. Those are not recovery points. You should not be hooking to those and doing recoveries. Those are transport points. They're designed to pull a free-rolling car in neutral up onto the deck of a transport like a rollback. The socket that those screw into is tack welded to sheet metal. Those are not recovery points, and even as someone who owns a towing company, we refuse to use them to even pull a car up onto a rollback because they're so well known for ripping out and then causing issues. So don't hook to that.
Okay, how about, can I do a recovery in reverse? As a recovery vehicle?
You can, but you have to think about what you're doing and the components you're using. In a differential, the gears are made to work as efficiently as possible and be as strong as possible in one direction, which means they're as weak as possible in the other direction. That's your ring and pinion. Your U-joints, they don't know forward or reverse, so it doesn't matter as far as that goes, but what you do have to watch out for, especially if you're turned in a binary like that, when you're backing up, pulling on the front, you're going to have a lot more traction on your front tires, which puts a bigger bind on your U-joints. If you have to, do it cautiously, keep your wheel straight just to help out those U-joints, and use some common sense.
Now the question is, how do I recover from a hitch? And also, along with that, what if I don't have a recovery point that I can put into a hitch?
So that's something I run into a whole lot, is people have a ball hitch or something in here with a locking pin that they don't have the key to. Happens all the time. That's the great thing about the soft shackle, is you can take the soft shackle and just stick it around the receiver tube itself. And this is every bit as strong, if not stronger than this, because this is just connected to this anyway. So that is a really great way to get around someone who has a pin or a hitch locked in here.
So what if there is a ball on the hitch? Can I use a ball?
Absolutely not. Never, ever, never, no.
Okay, but I see people use it all the time.
Don't do it. Do not do it. That's not rated for it, not meant for it. Incredibly dangerous.
Okay. What if I have a drop hitch?
Again, dangerous. Drop hitch is a lever. So now not only are you putting, say this was a stiff point, not only now you're putting leverage on the hitch itself, you're putting leverage on everything, the structure of this all the way through. Drop hitches are a huge no. Even if it is a pedal hitch that's on a drop, no. That's a big lever.
What if I don't have a recovery point and I only have a pin? Can I use the pin?
So there's debate to this. The pin is in there. You can hook to the pin and pull on the pin. That's better than hooking onto a ball or a drop hitch or anything like that. But what this pin is rated to in a shear strength is not quite its rating anymore, because now you're pulling on it in the middle. Same thing as leverage. You're not in a close shear like that. Now you have a bit of leverage on it. What that leverage is, nobody knows. So can you? Yes, it's better than your other options, but basically there's no more rating. So back to your common sense.
Sure. What about, can I use the chain hooks?
No, that's a 1/8 inch piece of sheet metal.
Mm-hmm.
Will it hold? Probably. Should you use it for that? No.
Yeah. Can you put a soft shackle on something like that?
Definitely not, because that is smaller than the bend radius of a soft shackle.
What if I double back one rope?
So if you don't have the length or the room to do a full 30-foot run, which is another thing I run into quite a bit, being in the mountains and tight roads and all that, you absolutely can double up the rope and to shorten it up. But you got to remember, now the rope is twice as stiff. So,
Or close to.
close to. It's not going to have anywhere near the stretch. So be mindful of that before you hit the end of it and get a jolt instead of a nice, easy pull. It's still going to have some stretch to it, just not nearly as much as a single. The other thing to keep in mind, the bend radius of the rope. Don't double it up through a soft shackle because now you're bending it too tight. Something like a pedal hitch on the back of the truck, that's got a bend radius that is acceptable for the rope and you maintain its strength without hurting it.
If I double up the rope, does it double the working load limit?
Technically, no, because this rope was not tested and tagged and rated as doubled.
What
So
does that look like if it's on the tag?
it will say right here, the break minimum tensile strength of the rope or minimum breaking strength. That is what this is rated to and was tested at. It was not tested as a double, therefore there is technically no rating on that.
So if you look for that rating on the tag, what is the name of the rating?
In this configuration would be a basket. There is no basket rating because this is not tested in that configuration.
Okay. So in essence, you're guessing on what the basket rating would be if it was doubled up.
Correct. Okay.
So I've heard that when you're doing a recovery with a kinetic rope, you can back all the way up to the other vehicle and just smash on the gas. And however fast you go, it's only going to help. Is that true? How fast can you actually go during recovery?
Since you said can, yes, that's true. You can. What you should do is different. The proper amount of force to use for recovery is the minimum amount of force required to do the recovery. A lot of times I start with just like trying to ease up and pull on it. You can always increase your speed over and over again, but you can only one time do it too hard. So I always try as little as possible because the rope can put a lot of force into either end, and it's not so much the rope you got to worry about as what you're hooked to on either end.
So what's that process look like trying to find that minimum spot? Where do you start?
Go to the end of the rope, find the end of it, back up 5-6 feet, give her a little from there. If the vehicle you're hooked to doesn't even move an inch, maybe rethink what you're doing.
Okay.
If it comes out, great. If it moved almost out, back up a little more next time and do it again. You can always ease up very easily. You can't go back down.
Sure. Okay. Do you ever start with no bounce? Do you ever start to just try to see if you can pull it out?
Oh, yeah, quite a bit. I'll get up to the end of the rope, usually not from a pull, dead stop and go. I'll just, as I'm easing up to find the end of the rope, when I get there, I'll just roll right through and go. And a lot of times, that's all you need. That's one thing. The rope still will stretch, which lets you get that driving force out of there to pull the vehicle out without a jerk. So it still works just like that.
What's the max speed you'd be comfortable going?
The max recommended speed is 5 miles an hour.
Okay.
Which is a lot of force in the rope. It doesn't sound like much, but in all reality, if you back up 10 feet and just give it, by the time you get to the end of that rope, you're really only doing 5 miles an hour. It seems a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like on video, it's really cool and sensational to like V8 to the floor, revving, big old run at the rope, but it doesn't do anything for you.
So what really is the benefit of, with a kinetic rope actually moving for the pull, as opposed to just a strap or a chain where you're tight and then you're pulling them out?
Your vehicle is moving and going already. So you don't have to try to get started out and go, especially if you have a manual transmission. You don't have to try to let out the clutch and pull at the same time. You can be clutch all the way out going and pulling with an automatic even. Just your vehicle moving is a huge advantage to get that thing going.
Gotcha. Okay. And you're relying on momentum versus solely traction.
Yes.
Right. So during a recovery, can I just keep hitting it over and over and over and over and over? Or is...
The fibers stretch and heat up when they're used. So as far as like a decent pull on it, after about 5, the fibers are warm and stretched, and your stretchy rope turns more into a strappy rope. So if you give the rope a break to let those fibers kind of pull back in and cool down, about 5 minutes is all it takes, and the rope is reset, ready to go again. So 5 good pulls on it, give it a break.
Immediate pulls.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you've done 5 good pulls, the vehicle hasn't moved yet, probably take a break and reevaluate what's going on at the same time. So you might want to do something different.
On the ropes, typically we see what's called an MBS, and oftentimes we even see what's called a WLL. So what is that? What do they stand for, and what's the difference between them?
MBS is minimum braking strength. That means the minimum strength that rope will hold to before it breaks is that MBS number. Working load limit is WLL. That's the number you should stay under in general use of the rope. And that should give you about a 3-to-1 to 5-to-1 safety factor, depending on the type of rigging and the configuration it's used in. On a lot of the ropes, it just has the breaking strength number. And the reason for that is, again, with doing this stuff and pulling out with a vehicle, you never know exactly how much force you're putting on the rope. It's not like rigging where you know what you're lifting and pulling. It's a guess. That's why the ropes are sized more in vehicle size that you're pulling on it with, rather than hard numbers of a working load limit. So you shouldn't use a 3/4 inch rope with anything bigger than a small car, sedan, Subaru, anything like that. Because that car staying under the 5 miles an hour hitting the end of the rope is not going to exceed the safe working load limit of that rope. Definitely not going to exceed the braking strength. 7/8 rope, SUV, Jeep, something like that, at that 5 mile an hour recommended speed, you're not going to exceed the safe working load limit of that rope with that vehicle at that speed. And that just goes up to the size of the rope.
So you're saying if I have a backhoe that's 20,000 pounds, I can't use a 7/8 inch rope that's rated at a minimum braking strength of 28,000 pounds?
Can't and shouldn't. So if you have a 20,000 pound backhoe and you have a rope that's rated 28,000 pounds, you have no safety factor. That machine can very easily go over the minimum braking strength of that rope. It's called the minimum braking strength, not the braking strength, because every single rope is going to be varied by a few pounds, 50 pounds, whatever it is. But that is the minimum number. Knowing that they could be over that, you should never think they're going to be over that and be able to go past that.
And I mean, the closer you get to that minimum braking strength, it can break.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. You could have ran it over 2 weeks ago.
Yes, if there's
it could be damaged.
Cut it, damaged it, smashed it, that number will start to drop.
It can actually decrease.
Yeah.
Correct. When in considering the working load limit, are you basing that off of the vehicle that's stuck, or are you basing that off of the recovery vehicle?
Recovery vehicle. Because that is the vehicle that is putting the force into the rope. And the vehicle that's stuck, its weight is really irrelevant, because I can show you a 3,000 pound vehicle that takes 8,000 pounds of pull to get out, depending on how it's stuck. I can also show you an 80,000 pound vehicle that only takes 4,000 pounds of pull to get out, depending on how it's stuck. So you size the rope based on the vehicle doing the pulling, because that's the one that is putting the force into the rope, no matter what it's hooked to. A Geo Metro hooked to a school bus can't put any more force into that rope than a Geo Metro can pull.
Yep. So technically, too, you could use a very large rope to pull out something very small.
Correct.
As well.
But that very small vehicle is not probably going to have the weight to stretch that very large rope.
Correct.
So you do need to keep in mind that you can do it. It's just going to be much stiffer when it doesn't have that much weight behind it to stretch it.
So in that scenario, if you're using a tank and you're pulling out the Geo Metro, you're not bouncing on the line.
Correct.
You're going to get that tight, and you're fully using the rope as
just an extra cushion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, Casey, so when you pull up to a recovery, what's kind of the process of getting the rope out and making sure that you connect everything correctly?
So when I pull out the rope, I don't just take it out and dump it on the ground. What? I like to pull it out and like kind of run through it like this all the way through, because that ensures that there's no knots. And while I do it, I'm usually not looking at you. I'm looking at the rope as I'm doing it. And you can see if you have any cuts, abrasions, problems like that. And I always hook, obviously, the side that does not have the protector on it to my truck. And usually when I walk to the vehicle, I actually run back through it like this again, so that it's just a kind of a second check. And the side with the sleeve goes on the customer or stuffed vehicles in.
What if you end up doing a pull during the recovery and there is a knot?
If you have a knot in this and pull and tighten that knot, you basically just lost your rope, because you're not going to get it undone. That's why it's like a double check to make sure there's no knots. And the other thing I do that kind of has two purposes is, one, once I hook it up, I will pull it out to the driver's side. And the two things that does is, in my mirror, it gives me a visual when this disappears, that the rope's about to get tight. 2, it ensures that there are no knots in the rope. And 3, it's a good indicator to the person in the stuck vehicle of when they should start giving some throttle to help. When that disappears and goes tight into there, start helping out.
Once both vehicles are connected to each other, what do you typically tell the driver of the stuck vehicle? Okay.
Connected. So first thing, make sure parking brake's off. They're in the vehicle, in drive, to help out a little bit. And don't hit the throttle till the rope starts to get tight, just enough to get your tires moving. Don't spin the tires. Don't ever overrun the rope. Because if you're in sand or snow and the tires are spinning, the tires are digging. And that's putting you right back down into what you were stuck in instead of coming out on top of it and going. So just enough to help, not enough to spin, not enough to get slack in the rope. They should be helping, but keeping tension on the rope.
So you say one of the main goals of a recovery is to get them on top.
I would rather pull them over something than drag them through it.
When you're done with a recovery, vehicle's pulled out, you're getting out to come back, what does your process look like with the rope?
Well, number 1, tell them to put it in park before you crawl under to unhook or do anything. 2 is make sure they didn't run over the rope or anything like that. If you're on hard rocky ground like this or pavement like that and the rope went back under their tire and they ran it over and stretched it on there, you probably broke some fibers in the rope and that rope is considered done.
Mm-hmm. If it happened on snow or sand, maybe just an inspection to make sure.
Then it's an inspection as a judgment call.
Mm-hmm.
I've had plenty of people run them over in the snow and not had an issue because it just disappears down into it and it's been totally fine. But it's a look at the rope. Is the edge of it burned from the tire spinning on it? Because this end was hooked to the vehicle, so the tire's going to be spinning out. The rope's burned at all or rubber dug into it, tore the outer coating off, done. If you can't find a single mark on it, it was in snow or sand, you're probably just fine.
But if they ran over it in gravel or a asphalt surface,
yeah,
it's most likely toast.
Yes. To elaborate on that, or to further on that, yeah, the ropes are expensive, but buying a new rope is a lot cheaper than buying the back end of a truck or the front end of a car if one were to snap because it was damaged and you didn't replace it.
Okay, so on a Yankum rope, there is a black sleeve. What is that for, and why should you want one on your kinetic recovery rope?
So this is to protect the rope. It's an abrasion-resistant sleeve. Normally, it's up closer to the stuck vehicle end. So if you're pulling up against the bottom of the bumper, anything like that, it's to help protect the rope. If one of the tires hits it, if you're hooked to, pulling from the side, it's not going to burn the rope. Also, if there's a tree or something like that that you're pulling around, this can go on the tree and the rope will slide through it, kind of like a recovery ring, and let you pull around a tree or obstacle like that.
During a recovery, if I can't line up my recovery vehicle perfectly in line, is that okay? Is it okay if I pull from an angle?
That goes back to common sense. So if the recovery vehicle ideally is always pulling straight, even if it's pulling at an angle on the stuck vehicle, if the recovery vehicle is straight, that's your ideal. If you have to pull an angle, you can, but you have to keep in mind that when this pulls tight, it's going to pull the back end of this truck sideways. There's a couple of really famous videos on YouTube of a Jeep getting absolutely just tossed around to the side on ice, and then an Australian rig that actually flipped it over because they pulled really hard, yanked it sideways, it caught traction and flipped. So,
and that could happen also to the recovery vehicle.
It can. Yeah, I came very close to flipping a full-size Dodge pickup over, pulling on them at an angle, and it sunk in the snow instead of coming up out of the snow like I thought. And I looked in the mirror, and it's close. So straight is ideal, angle is possible, but be very cautious, especially on the recovery vehicle instead of the stuck vehicle.
But really, no matter what, especially the recovery vehicle, the second that thing's tight, if you were at an angle before, you're no longer at an angle.
Yeah, exactly.
It will straighten out everything.
So if it's at this angle and there's a ditch on that side of you, just know that when this pulls tight, you are going to be pointed at that ditch and heading in that direction because it's going to pull the back end of your truck over.
If 30 feet doesn't make it between the two vehicles and I want to connect two ropes, what's the process? And is there anything I should consider when I connect two ropes?
So you can connect two ropes end to end by just simply soft shackling together, just like this. In this case, this is a 1-inch rope and a 3/4-inch rope. So you do have to keep in mind that if you're using 2 different sizes, whatever the weakest is in the whole system is your rating. The 1-inch doesn't matter anymore. We're only good for what a 3/4 can do. But if you're using equal size ropes and you need 2 of them to get a farther distance between you and the vehicle, like I just had one where there's a giant mud hole in between that I needed to get on the other side of, you can absolutely do that. You still got to keep in mind that it's 30% stretch. So now 30 feet of rope is 60 feet of rope. It's a whole lot more stretch, which can help you if you've got the momentum into it. But you get too much of that and it can hurt you because now it's slowing you down before it gets to the point of the kinetic energy transferring. And by the time all that kinetic energy is ready to transfer, you're stopped.
Can I connect a hard shackle between them?
You can. It's a terrible idea.
Why is that?
These are bungee cords. And again, it's not a worry of the rope letting loose. It's a worry of a connection point on another vehicle or your vehicle letting loose. And then you now have a very heavy chunk of steel on the end of the bungee cord flying in one direction or the other.